On Thursday, President Cyril Rhamaposa is expected to deliver the State of the Nation address. The State of the Nation address marks the official start of the parliamentary program for the year ahead. The President's office has indicated that this year's address will be a significant one as the country marks 30 years of democracy. For more on that, we're joined via Teams by political analyst Dr. mgkoba. Doctor, good afternoon and thank you very much for your time.
Good afternoon.
No, it's a pleasure to have you with us. So SONA, Doctor, as we know it, is a platform for the President to take us through his key policy objectives. Now, in the wake of all that South Africans have to contend with now, what do you expect the President to focus on at SONA?
I think he's going to start on the issue of unemployment because the numbers have been too high, and in the past few years, there's no chance that the country or the government is doing anything to alleviate unemployment. On the second issue, the president would want to talk about issues such as gender-based violence, that South Africa continues to be a country that is riddled by gender-based violence, and other issues that he would want to talk about is the issue of energy crisis and load shedding. In his previous State of the Nation address, he spoke about the plans to restructure Eskom, and I think he's going to use this State of the Nation address as an opportunity to report back on how his government is working to resolve the issue of energy crisis. One of the most important things that I think he will talk about is the issue of the Zondo Commission. Remember that the Zondo Commission was at the center of state capture allegations, and we haven't seen much of actions in the past few months or years. So I think this gives an opportunity to the president to tell the nation how is his government or the state dealing with the outcomes of the Zondo Commission report. And one thing that comes out of the themes of the State of the Nation address is that we tend to see more focus on micro issues such as health, education, matric results, corruption. But the president has not used this opportunity to tell the nation that his government is running a neoliberal capitalist system, and how is that system been working to resolve South Africa's triple problems: unemployment, poverty, and inequality. So his State of the Nation address do not come in the center of those type of issue, because if you check how Mbeki handled things, Mbeki would clearly say to us that this country is a capitalist system, and this is how we are running the capitalism. But under Rhamaposa, we haven't seen that level of transparency in terms of what is the micro position of the country on global issues, on political issues in South Africa. All we see are these macro issues that I've identified.
Doctor, I want to take you to your first point. You identified unemployment as possibly one of the key focus areas for the president. We know there's a big debate. It was sparked actually last year at his State of the Nation when he went on to speak that perhaps the private sector needed to come on board and be the creators of employment. We know that the likes of COSATU as well as the SACP as tripartite alliance members of the ANC went on to say, no, actually the private sector cannot be relied upon to create jobs. It has to be government that stimulates the economy or probably just funds small business enterprises to employ, because at any given opportunity, the private sector might opt to automate or mechanize because at the heart of it, they are profit driven.
Definitely. I think, unfortunately, unemployment works well for the private sector because they know there's availability of cheap labor, highly qualified people who are unemployed that they can tap into in order to maximize profit. And I think that's where we see the reproduction of neoliberalism in Ramaphosa's government, in which there's over-reliance on private sector, whereas the state has to intervene in matters of the economy. And I think crucially, the issue of unemployment belong to the state. The state has to take a central role, that they provide capacity for every aspect of the sector, whether it's agriculture, mining, technology, broadcasting, so on and so forth. So that's where the government has to come on board in terms of ensuring that all the sectors of the economy are functioning maximally, and the state is creating a good environment for that. And that's how they can kind of bring a contribution rather than over-relying on a sector that is interested in maximizing capital accumulation.
Is it not idealistic, though? Because I remember Thabo Mbeki also stressed this and warned against privatization or relying on the private sector too heavily for what should ultimately be government functions. But in this case where the economy is struggling, is it not better to actually invite the private sector to assist where government is failing?
I think the private sector, the issue is that they are profit-based. What the government can do the least is to make sure that South Africa is good for business in terms of strengthening regulations, instead of in the case of making sure that there's less corruption, there's less crime. People that are starting businesses in South Africa, they know they can run their businesses without worries. And I think that's how the state can step in. But outsourcing the responsibility of political development to private sector doesn't work well. And I think that's what the ANC has been doing since 1994. There's been over-reliance on corporate domination and outsourcing of political responsibilities, and that has not worked. That's why we continue to see unemployment rising, because the responsibility of creating jobs is not that of capital. Capital, it's here to make money, and the state has to make sure that in the process of capital making money, they also have a share.
Then I want to take you to your second point. You mentioned Eskom as another key focus area. Dan Morakane will join as CEO next month. Now, many have cautioned against viewing any Eskom leader as a messiah because the problems are systemic. Do you believe, though, that his presence as someone who has been at Eskom before could result in faster change than his predecessor?
I think the problem that Eskom is experiencing, institutional and systemic problem, is quite key, because we don't see individual problems there. He might come as a good leader, but the issue is that Eskom find itself in the process of privatization, the contestation of political power in the energy sector. And that is not going to be the responsibility of the individual. And that's where the government needs to take a stance that this is how we want to produce energy, and this is how we want to run Eskom as a public entity. The moment they start talking about independent power producers, then that's where you see this neoliberal power contestation, in which there's a desire to privatize Eskom or electricity as a public good. And that's where someone as an incoming CEO, whether he has experience or he doesn't have experience, is not going to count, because the government needs firstly deal with the politics of energy production, and everything else will follow into place. Because what we see at Eskom is a power struggle of energy production rather than the competency of the leaders that have been appointed. And I think once government sort out the politics and ensure that they have a stance and they decide on how energy should be produced, and ultimately the running of Eskom, any person with qualified skills should be able to run the entity to its full potential.
And then what are your expectations, or what would you like to hear the president state on the current logistics crisis, which relates to Transnet, which has significantly threatened or continues to threaten the mining industry?
I think that's one of the keyest aspect of economic development. I think he needs to come stronger there, because if the Transnet is not functioning maximally, the economy which relies on mining is on the brink of collapsing. And I think that's where he needs to take South Africans into confidence and tell us what is the diagnosis of the problem and what is government going to do to resolve the problem. Because if Transnet is not functioning to its fullest, then the road infrastructure is not functioning properly. It means that, like Eskom, this is going to be another problem that kills businesses in South Africa.
All right, Doctor, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. That is Dr. mgkoba speaking to us ahead of the State of the Nation address this Saturday.